Do you guys remember the time I walked into the classroom and I said, "Quiz day"? I miss those times. Those times were normal. Now everything is crazy and scary. But it'll be back to normal again. Hopefully sooner than you're sitting here thinking about it. And in the fall, we'll all have a share a Coca-Cola or something. Today we're talking about divine eternity. Last time we talked about divine simplicity, we found out that thinking about God is a very strange thing because, there's a serious sense in which you can't do it because you don't have any category that you can put God in. There's no group of things that God belongs to. So another really strange thing is God's eternity. Now, you might think, if you didn't do the audiobook assignment that I gave you, you might think that the word eternity just means always, always around, always there. How long did you take to write that paper? Oh, it took an eternity to write that paper. It took an eternity to read that book. That's not what Aquinas means by the word eternity, though. And so if you haven't listened to the Eleanor Stump audiobook, close this window and go listen to it, because she explains divine eternity much better than I could. That's probably my favorite part of that whole audio. The reason I have you buy that audiobook, and for nothing else, I like that one chapter on divine eternity very much. So what is eternity when Aquinas is talking about God? Eternity means no before or afters. God doesn't have a before or an after. You have before and after. Before you watched this video, you were doing something else. After this semester is over, life will start returning to normal. You have a right now also. What are you doing right now? It's not what you were doing yesterday, and it's not what you're going to do tomorrow. Well, God has no before or after. There's just now, just a present moment in God. Always one present moment. You have to endure through time. You have to go forward. You have to change. Well, this is the main reason Aquinas thinks God doesn't have a before and after, is because befores and afters imply changes. And remember, Aquinas thinks that God is what answers the question, why any change at all? Why is there such a thing as change? And if that's the case, God can't be undergoing change. If God's going to answer the question, why change, God can never undergo change. Well, if you never undergo change, there's no before and after. Before and after always refers to some change that's happened. Well, even yesterday you weren't watching this video. Something's changed. Now you're watching this video. That's what before and after. That's what before and after amounts to. You always talk about before and after with regards to some change. What changed? When you ask that question, what changed, you're saying, how were things before such that they are not now? How were things before such that they will not be this way after? So that's really hard to think about, right? It's really hard to think about something that doesn't have a before and an after, because every single thing that you've ever encountered, that you've ever thought about or could think about, had a before and an after. For one thing, it was there before you encountered it, and it'll be there after, perhaps. Certainly you'll be there after you encountered something from the past. So this is a very, very unusual God for Aquinas. And at this point, since this is our last lecture on Aquinas for the semester, at this point I'd like to consider some questions that you might have about Aquinas on God. Because you might be sitting there thinking, this is very unusual. This isn't what they told me at the Catholic school that I went to. This isn't what the brothers or the sisters told me. This is very different from what I got at Sunday school or catechism classes. And yet Aquinas is recognized as a saint in the Catholic Church. He's considered by the popes to be the top theologian for Christians. And so you might be wondering, how does what Aquinas has to say about God latch on to the things that you've been taught about God? And I'll answer you. And this is a little bit of theology. I'm moving a little bit here from philosophy to theology, but I just want to complete the story here. Aquinas believes, as a Christian, that at a definite point in history, about 2,000 years ago, someone was born who had not one essence, but two. Remember that word essence I taught you? What's your essence? Humanity. What's Mr. Whiskers' essence? Kitty catness. Aquinas believes someone was born who had two essences. The first essence was humanity, just like you and me. But this person also had a second essence. What is it? We don't know. We don't know. We have a word for it. We call it divinity. We don't know what it is, but it's whatever it is that answers the question, why is there anything at all instead of nothing whatsoever? Whatever it is that answers that, its essence was present in Jesus just as much as his humanity was. This is the Christian doctrine called the Incarnation. Now, it's important to realize that for Aquinas, the Incarnation is not an event in the life of God. God didn't change in any way by becoming incarnate, because God can't change. The Incarnation changes the created side of things. The Incarnation changes the universe that God has created, but it doesn't change God at all. So that's the story of Christianity. And if you ask me, is there any chance of ever getting an answer to the question, why is there anything at all instead of nothing whatsoever? In other words, what is God? The answer is yes. Aquinas thinks this. If you live the right kind of life, the right kind of good Christian life, when you die, you'll get the answer to the question, why anything at all instead of nothing whatsoever, but not by learning it, not by studying it, but by becoming it. Aquinas believes, I've told you this before, in the divinization of human beings, that you were created to become God, that you were created to share that life, that divine, immutable life. So it's a very unusual theory, to be certain. You don't see it as much anymore. We'll talk a little bit in the future about why it's getting eclipsed by other approaches to philosophy of religion. When I say you'll learn the answer to the question, the God question, by becoming part of it, it's a little bit like being adopted by a family. This is the analogy Aquinas will sometimes allude to. You could tell me all kinds of things about your family. You could tell me all kinds of them, your traditions for Thanksgiving or for vacations, or your brother loves to play practical jokes, your mom's a terrible cook. You can tell me all these things. And that's cool. I've learned something about your family. But I don't know what it's like to be in your family. I don't know what it's like to be in your family. Now, you could invite me over for dinner. And if your family's sufficiently relaxed, okay, now I get a flavor, I get a sense for it, kind of get a feeling for it. But really, if I want to know what your family is, you're just going to have to adopt me. I'm just going to have to be part of your family. I'll go to all the same events as you, all the holidays, gift exchanges, all that. Now, after enough time of doing that, now I understand your family. I understand your family in a way I never could have, no matter how much you had told me about it. Well, Aquinas thinks there's something analogous going on in the Christian tradition. Well, just like going to dinner and hearing stories and anecdotes about your family tells me something, so thinks Aquinas, we can get a sense for what God is like by studying the historical person of Jesus Christ. Because Jesus had the divine nature, we can kind of get a sense for God by looking at how Jesus behaves. So if you want to know what God's love is like, look at Jesus. It's a love that reaches out to the oppressed and to the marginalized in society. If you want to know what the divine providence, the divine care is like, look at Jesus. But then, if you actually want to understand divine love, see, I mean, you can study the New Testament, study the Gospel, study the Bible all you want, but you'll never really understand divine love. You just kind of get a sense for it. But if you live the way Jesus said to live, this is what Aquinas thinks, if you live that way, if you love others, if you love the oppressed, the marginalized, if you're giving of yourself, if you have the virtues of faith, hope, charity that we talked about, then good news. You'll die, or I'll die, but at the end of time, you'll be back. Just like you're back right now, except next time, like Jesus, you're going to be living God. You're going to be living in the divine family. You're going to be living in the divinity. You'll come to participate in that essence. So what I'm trying to say here is, I mean, you should listen to the Eleanor Stump chapter on divine eternity. And the takeaway you should get from Aquinas is, I talked about it last time, apophaticism. That's what that A stands for. Apophaticism, right? Aquinas, no matter what you ask Aquinas, you know, is God this that kind of thing? Is God that kind of thing? It's always going to be the same answer from Aquinas. He's always going to say no. That's supposed to induce in you a sense of awe. That's kind of the good news. If you could figure out what God is, if you had an image of God, God's this kind of thing, think about how boring it would be, how dreadfully boring such a God is. I don't want to worship one more thing. You know, nobody should be committing their life in that kind of serious way to just one more thing. I mean, Aquinas takes this very seriously, right? The early church was literally, it looks insane what these people are willing to do, right? They're becoming Christians. What's that mean? It means they're giving up all hopes and ambitions, all efforts to become rich, all efforts to become great and powerful. They're surrendering all that for the sake of loving others, and they're getting killed for it, right? We know that the Romans persecuted the early church and that Christians were killed. Aquinas thinks if you're going to dedicate yourself to that, then it can't just be one more thing, this God that the Christians have devoted themselves to. It's got to be something, again, I have to use the M word, mysterious, right? Something behind it all, so to speak. So that's the good news. Aquinas thinks that God is in control of everything, every atom in the universe, even this coronavirus outbreak. God has a plan for it all, hard as it is to fathom. We'll talk about the problem of evil. That's the last thing we're going to talk about this semester, is the problem of evil. Before I get to the problem of evil, I need to tell you about some twists and turns in the history of philosophy of religion after Aquinas, starting with a guy named René Descartes. René Descartes. That'll be our next lecture. For now, you should be studying this. Remember, in April, I'm going to be sending you out a pop quiz, so make sure you've looked at these lectures, put some questions and comments down in the com box there. Kind of want to say that, click like on this video, like and share if you want more fun Kovac content in the future. I hope you're all well. If anything's bothering you, don't hesitate to send me an email. This divine eternity, I mean, I wish there was more for me to say about it. Normally at this point in the semester, students are asking a lot of questions, which is why I only have, about 10 to 15 minutes prepared for some of these topics. It's because usually the class discussions end up getting very intense. So again, put some questions down there for me, and this is the end of Aquinas as we know it. I feel fine. We're going to read Descartes. We're going to read Hume, David Hume. Then we're going to read about the problem of evil. We'll hear from Herbert McCabe again. And that'll be a wrap. Hope you're doing well. Bye.